So you finally chose the right water treatment system that will work great for your needs, but here's what a lot of folks get wrong: the installation and startup. If you miss a step here, you could end up creating all kinds of problems later that might make it difficult to maintain the system, or maybe it won't turn out the way you really wanted it. So miss a step here and your water could still end up not smelling right or not being the right treatment system that you thought it was going to be. In this video, we're going to show you how to install the system the right way, start it up safely, and keep it running for years to come. Welcome back to our DIY well water treatment series. In step 5, we're getting hands-on. We're going to go over best practices for installing your system and starting it up, and how to do basic maintenance to keep it running for years to come. Let's get started. So the first step in installing your system is, when you did your physical inspection of your site, you already probably pre-sited or picked a place where it can go. But just to go over that again, generally, you want to keep your system out of the weather. You don't want it to be out in the sun or the rain. If you do keep it outside, you at least have to keep it from freezing, and you should have some kind of sun protection. You don't want the sun beating down on your water softener, iron filter, or chlorinator. You want to keep it out of the sun. You want to avoid high water pressure. If you have over 80 PSI, you'd want to put in a pressure regulator. In terms of the plumbing setup, you want to think, do I want all my water to go through my filter for my garden water irrigation if you have irrigation? Generally, you'd want to separate those two and have just the water treated inside the house, unless you specifically plan to treat irrigation water. And on a well system, you always want to install your water treatment system after the pressure tank. Some folks will say, well, I want to protect my pressure tank, but really the pressure tanks enter in and out the bottom. They don't usually accumulate sediment, especially if you're getting a backwashing filter or a filter cartridge. You wouldn't want to put that before your pressure tank, which can interfere with the pressure switch and the pressure settings. So generally put it after the pressure tank. As always, you want to make sure your filter system has some kind of unions. A lot of the softeners and iron filters nowadays all come with unions on the bypass, but you want to make sure there's unions so you could easily disconnect it if you have to. And also you want to make sure there's a bypass around it. Now, most of the iron filters and softeners, they do have a bypass valve as part of the system, but you might even consider it if you have even a standard system. Say you have a big blue filter or an ultraviolet sterilizer. Those don't come with bypass valves typically. So you'd want to just put a couple valves around it so you can easily bypass it should you ever have to. Sometimes something could come up where you wanted to bypass for some reason. And remember, with drains, and this is usually in the instructions that you get from the factory, when you're connecting your system, say it's backwashing filter system or a water softener that has a drain, you'd want to make sure that is connected to an approved air gap. You don't want to directly connect your drain, your backwash line right into your system, or if it ever backed up, there could be possibility of a cross connection between the sewer water and your system. So you'd use an air gap. It's very simple, they're very cheap, and you can also make one yourself. You just want to have a gap of air so when the drain water comes out, it doesn't immediately connect right to the drain. In terms of electrical, most of these types of filter systems use very little power. They're usually DC current, but they draw very little amps. So you don't usually have to worry about having a dedicated circuit, except unless it was like a booster pump or some kind of pump and motor. If it's for standard UV sterilizers, chlorinators, iron filter softeners, they use very little power. If it's in a situation where there's water around, say it's you're putting it near a sink, then you would want to have a GFI outlet, plug it into a GFI outlet. The other thing is that if you're putting a chlorination pump or a hydrogen peroxide pump or a pump for soda ash, you'd want to make sure those types of systems are on a surge protector. The other critical thing to think about when you go to install your new system is you want to make sure you sanitize the pipes. So you want to sanitize the system and the plumbing. These are often instructions are included with your system, but think about it when you're putting in a system, your hands are all over it, you're opening up your plumbing. It's a good idea anytime your well is worked on or your plumbing that you sanitize the pipes. One easy way to do it, if you have a pre-filter before your system, say a filter strainer like a Rusco filter strainer or something, just to keep the sand and grit as a first stage, or you could use a big blue filter. You can add a little bit of bleach into that, screw it back on, turn the water back on, and flush a little bit of bleach into your household pipes. So a little bit of bleach, like a quarter cup or a few tablespoons of bleach and a gallon of water in your pre-filter or pipes and then turn on the water in your house, run the water until you think you can smell chlorine, and then just let the water, turn it off and let it sit for an hour or so, and that'll help sanitize the pipes. So when you first go to install your system, when you're doing the installation, is the actual startup. So a lot of folks think, oh, I've done all my plumbing, I've connected my in to the inlet, my out, I followed the diagram, I have a shut-off valves, I have a hose bib after each stage, which is very important. So you can check what, after your iron filter, after softener, you want to put in a faucet or hose bib so you can test the water later. But what they think that they're done, but actually that's sort of the beginning, because after you get this system all installed and you bring it up to pressure and there's no leaks, you want to follow the startup procedures in the manufacturer manual, which usually involves backwashing or rinsing the system several times. So with softener, and some carbon systems, you can usually do it once or sometimes twice, but for some iron filter media and others, you need to do it 1 or 2 times or 3 times, backwash it and rinse it thoroughly to prepare the media for your water. So we talked about this in the previous videos, but it's very important to test your water. So say you're installing an iron filter, you'd want to test for iron, but what's really important to do is to have a little kit where you can test for iron before and after once you've installed the system. So you've got the system installed and you have your hose bib right after the, talking about iron filters, right after the iron filter, then you'd want to test your water there before and after to make sure it's doing what you expect to be doing. And then it's a good idea in the beginning to test it periodically, maybe test it once a week or once a month. It's a quick test just to verify that it's working. All these different types of systems, the self-cleaning ones like sediment backwash, acid neutralizers, iron filters, water softeners, nitrate systems, they all have settings so they can be set to regenerate more or less, to backwash more or less, or to backwash more frequently or infrequently, to use less salt or more salt if it's a softener or nitrate system. So all the settings you would follow when you initially set up your system, but by testing the water, you can then know exactly where you're at and make adjustments later. So with any startup, it's important not to rush the process. Let the system come up to pressure and follow the instructions, backwash it, or regenerate a couple times, sanitize the pipes, test the water, but you generally need a couple hours for the startup. So it's not something with most of these type of treatment systems, you can't just turn them on and start using the water. You want to turn them on, check for leaks, and bring up the pressure and test the water and go through the steps. Okay, so now you've got your system installed, it's protected out of the sun and rain, and it's working good. You've got good water pressure. Now what do you do? So what we recommend is you get a little clipboard and a log or just a piece of paper and just write down a quick note when you perform maintenance to it. So it could just be a few words, and if you put it on a clipboard and hang it near the system, and with pencil or pen, it's something you could do each time. It's very quick, and then it'll pay back over the years because you can tell, oh, in the beginning I was changing my filter every 3 months, but now I'm changing it every month. Like what happened? What changed? Or if you have a water softener, hey, I put in 4 bags. Now I've had to put in more. Like, is there any change in the water? And then by combining that with periodic water testing, which also just takes minutes to do, especially if you have your own test kit at home, you could quickly test it in minutes, make a note of the hardness or the iron levels on your clipboard. Then you can see over time, oh, that's interesting. My well water has higher iron in the winter or has higher iron levels in the summer when the water table's lower, perhaps. So by keeping notes on a clipboard, it can save you a lot of trouble in the long run. And then if you need help, professional help, whether someone comes to the site or if you're working with us, if you contacted us, our support techs could then work with you and say, oh, this is what you were doing. okay, we might want to change this or that. So by keeping a few notes, it will help in the long term, because essentially you're the operator of your well. You're in charge of your well water for your family. And so you're like professional in charge of your well. So just by keeping a few notes, it can help a lot in the long term. So what are some annual tasks? Most of our customers, when we work with folks, we try not to set up any kind of system that would require weekly maintenance or even monthly maintenance. There are some systems, such as if you had a chlorinator or a peroxide injection system, you might want to add the solution fresh every month or two, but you shouldn't be nothing you have to do weekly. That's too much trouble, especially if you can go yearly, that's the best. So you might want to check it once after a while, test your water, but there's nothing physically you have to do to it. Like for instance, say you get you have low pH water, acid water, and you get a calcite neutralizer. Most of those are size, so they get you through the year, and once a year, you unscrew the little cap and add more calcite into it. So with water softeners, most brine tanks are size, so you can add salt every few months, sometimes every 6 months. So essentially, if you get a softener, you just have to lift up the lid, look in there. If you have salt left, you don't have to add it that day, but eventually, it'll go down and you have to fill it back up with salt again. Typical family might use 1 or 2 bags of salt a month if they use a lot of water, depending on how hard the water is. So some systems are very critical, such as ultraviolet sterilizers. The UV lamps, the bulbs have to be changed once a year based on the manufacturer. If they're burning all the time, they're on all the time, which is typical, then they last about 13 months. So we just tell folks, hey, once a year for most. There are a few that last longer, but for most UV lamps out there, you want to change them once a year. So filter cartridges would be changed. Basically, it's when the pressure drops. So if you have a whole house filter cartridge, then generally you have to change it if your pressure starts to drop off. That's why we usually don't recommend only filter cartridges. Sometimes that's a good way to go because it's the lowest cost, and doesn't use any backwash water, but it can be inconvenient because you might have to change it sometimes every week if you have lots of sediment in the water. So it kind of varies based on the case by case. And generally, with all this type of setup is based on your water chemistry, like what you're trying to treat, and how much water you use. So if you have 1 or 2 folks in the home, you don't use that much water, obviously you're going to have less maintenance than a big family. You use a lot of water. So you can kind of plan in advance and work with your provider to make sure you get a system that doesn't require frequent maintenance. But you do need some maintenance though. And it's good to think about that. Just like a car, you wouldn't drive your car for years with ever changing the oil. Same with your treatment system. You don't want to just run it and never maintain it, because eventually it'll force you to do something. So it's good to be on top of it and know what maintenance you're going to do, and then keep a clipboard and write down what that maintenance is. Generally, one question we get a lot is that it's good to have spare parts on hand and a test kit. So there's a few things you might want to have. If you have a filter system, let's say a big blue filter cartridge that requires filter changes, you'd want to have an extra O-ring. With ultraviolet sterilizers, you'd want to have an extra UV lamp. You want to have an extra of what you're dealing with, whether it's filter cartridges or common things that would be required. And this you can know in the beginning before you buy your system, like what spare parts should I have on hand? Because if you have a system that's critical, where if this system goes down, we can't use our water, then you really want to have spares of everything. But if you have a situation where the water is annoying, we want to clean it up, but it's not like going to kill us if we win a week with rusty water or whatever, then you just know that that's what you're dealing with. That if you need a spare part, it could take several days to a week to get it. So you might want to have the common items. So there would be filter cartridges, O-rings, and UV sterilizers or other spare parts kits that are recommended for that system that you got. And lastly, I mentioned this before, but it's a good idea to have a test kit. It's a good idea to get a lab test done periodically, but for the most common things like water hardness, iron, manganese, your total solids, if you're using a reverse osmosis system, the pH of your water, those are all can be done with a very inexpensive test kit, $30, $40, $50. And that thing you can have on hand, and it can test the water regularly. So in other words, it's not just like a one-shot test. It's something you could have there, last for years. It's something you can test the water before and after and see how it's doing. Matter of fact, we sell our easy well water test kits, and I'll put a link in the description below on how you can get one of these. They're very low cost, and it has everything you need in order to test the water yourself. That way you don't have to every time send out a report, wait for the report, make a change, send another report. That's just not practical because it's expensive. Okay, so I hope that helped. Taking your time during the installation startup really pays off over the long term. And I'm putting a link in the description to the complete playlist of this series. If you haven't watched the other videos, go through them. They're packed with great information. And as always, if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us, and we're glad to help.